Dashtileg, welcome back to Tibet This Week, a weekly news edition on Tibet, His Holiness the Dalai Lama and the Central Tibetan Administration. Let us look at today's headlines. His Holiness the Dalai Lama congratulates Petr Pavel on his election as President of Czech Republic. Central Tibetan Administration offers long life prayers to His Holiness the Dalai Lama. 17th Tibetan Parliament commences 5th session. Parliamentary delegations from Europe, Mexico and Lithuania join commemoration of Tibetan National Uprising Day. China interrupts Tibetan speaker at United Nations session. Italian Senate launches Italian Parliamentary Intergroup for Tibet. Deputy Speaker launches Italian version of Tibet Brief 2020. Australian All-Party Parliamentary Friends of Tibet issued statement on Tibetan Uprising Day. Taiwan commemorates Tibetan Women's Uprising Day. On Monday this week, His Holiness the Dalai Lama wrote to His Excellency Petr Pavel to congratulate him on his election as the President of the Czech Republic. In the letter, His Holiness reminisces his fond memories of his visit to the Czech Republic beginning in March 1990 during the President Václav Havel's leadership following the collapse of communism, and wished the new president every success and challenges that lie ahead in fulfilling the wishes and aspirations of the people of Czech Republic. On Wednesday this week, a long live prayer offering to His Holiness the Dalai Lama was made by the Central Tibetan Administration, representing the collective aspirations of all Tibetans and their fervent prayers for His Holiness the Dalai Lama's long and healthy life. The elaborate ceremonial offering was attended by the heads of the three pillars of the Tibetan democracy, Tibetan religious heads and their representatives, the staff of the Central Tibetan Administration, members of the monastic institutions and general public. His Holiness assured the gatherings of his good health while demonstrating his competence and determination to serve Buddha Dharma and fulfill the collective aspirations of the Tibetan people. The 5th session of the 17th Tibetan Parliament commenced on Wednesday this week. The session will continue for 10 days. In the opening remarks, Speaker Khenpo Sonam Tembel emphasized the importance of dedicated efforts from every Tibetan in fulfilling His Holiness' commitments while calling for unity amongst Tibetans. The Speaker acknowledged the increasing number of the Tibet supporters in recent years, acknowledging the formation of the Mexican Parliamentary Tibet Support Group, the Interparliamentary Group for Tibet in the Spanish Senate, the introduction of the bicameral Tibet bill in the U.S. legislature, along with the endorsement of the Tibet's middle way approach in Canadian House of Commons, and successive resolutions on Tibet passed in the United Nations Human Rights Council. Over 30 members of the parliamentary delegations from European Parliament, Mexican Parliament, Lithuanian Parliament and Taiwanese Parliament showed their support and solidarity with the Tibetans by joining the official commemoration of the 64th Tibetan Uprising in Dharamshala this year on March 10. The commemoration event was attended by a visiting delegation of the European Parliament comprised of members of European Parliament Megula Peksa, Selima Yembo, Hannes Heidi and Ostra Meldikin. The delegation from Mexico Parliament consists of members of Parliament Lidia Garcia Anaya, Dulce Maria Corina, Ines Para Horace, Salvador Caro Cabrera, Maria Elena Limon Garcia, Ma Teresa Rosua Oca Mejia, Julieta Mejia Ibanez, Lidia Perez Barcinas, Jose Miguel de la Cruz Lima, a Lithuanian parliamentarian, Arunas Velinkas, and the president of the National Endowment for Democracy, Demon Wilson, were also among the distinguished guests at the commemoration. Chief guest at the commemoration, member of the European Parliament, Megula Peksa, in his key address, expressed the European Union's strong condemnation and criticism to China's oppressive policies involving mass DNA collection testing, violating the rights of the Tibetans, and the forced assimilation of Tibetan children into the majority Han culture through the mandatory colonial boarding system. He added that these pressing issues are taken into serious consideration by the European Union. Special guest Damon Wilson, president of the National Endowment for Democracy, commended the inspiring courage and the indestructible spirit of the Tibetan people while conveying his solidarity and support for the Tibetan people's struggle for freedom, justice and democracy. Special guest Arunas Velinkas, member of the Parliament of Lithuania, shared his experiences of growing up under the occupation of the Soviet Union and the collective lesson learned by the people of Lithuania during those turbulent times. He attributed their persistence and resilience to the compassion and sincere interest shown by His Holiness the Dalai Lama in Lithuania's struggle for liberty. Special guest Salvador Caro Cabrera lauded the resilience and commitment of the Tibetan people against China as the powerful oppressor. He encouraged the Tibetan people to firmly continue their pursuit of freedom, justice and non-violence. The distinguished guests of the Central Tibetan Administration expressed their genuine solidarity and support towards resolving the Tibet-China conflict and voiced their concern over China's enforcement of repressive policies inside Tibet at the joint press conference organized by the Department of Information and International Relations, Central Tibetan Administration, in the afternoon of 10th March. The guests had an audience with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, where His Holiness stressed on the importance of promoting oneness of humanity and reiterated his belief in democracy. The Kasha and the Tibetan Parliament in Exile hosted the visiting delegations, where the delegations met with the leadership of the Central Tibetan Administration. Tibetans and Friends of Tibet across the world commemorated the 64th Tibetan National Uprising Day to honor the Tibetan martyrs and express solidarity with the appalling situation in Tibet. Hundreds of Tibetans took to the streets of Brussels on Friday to protest against the illegal Chinese occupation of Tibet. Tibetans gathered at the Schumann roundabout, also known as the European Quarter, which hosts the headquarters of the European Commission and the Council, to protest against the decades of Chinese atrocities. Carlo Luke, president of Belgian Buddhist Union, ICT Brussels, David van der Meulen, Office of Tibet Secretary Tinley Wangtu, and representatives of Tibetan associations in Brussels were among the distinguished guests. In France, around 750 Tibetans and Tibet supporters held a peace march from the Freedom Ground to Chinese Embassy in Paris. As per the directions of the Office of Tibet Brussels, Bureau de Tibet in Paris have also sent off Tibetan national flags to 671 regions inside France, appealing them to hoist their flags during the 10th March, and many have consented. Tibetan community in Japan and Students for Free Tibet Japan chapter jointly organized a peace march to commemorate the 64th anniversary of the Tibetan National Uprising Day. After the official talk function, around 100 Tibetans and supporters from Japanese, Uyghurs, Chinese and South Mongolian held a peace march traversing the streets of Shibuya city, raising slogans and carrying Tibetan flags and placards. The peace march headed to the Chinese embassy in Tokyo, where slogans for free Tibet, human rights and religious freedom in Tibet were raised. The Tibetans in North America, affiliated under 30 different Tibetan associations, have commemorated the 64th anniversary of the Tibetan National Uprising Day by sending applications to regional lawmakers of the United States appealing to support the enactment of the recently introduced bicameral Tibet Bill, a resolution to the Tibet-China Conflict Act. The mayor of the Royal Borough of Greenwich, Councillor Leo Fletcher, and the leader of the Royal Borough of Greenwich, Councillor Anthony Oroki, showed their solidarity with Tibet by raising Tibet flag at the Woolwich Town Hall, the headquarters of Royal Borough of Greenwich, located in southeast London. The Tibet Support Group in Northeast India inaugurated a book titled Free Tibet, Voice from Assam, commemorating the 64th Tibetan National Uprising Day on 10 March 2023 at Guwahati Press Club, Assam. The book is written by Navanita Sharma, coordinator of Free Tibet, a voice from Assam based in Guwahati. The book launch was attended by prominent writers, journalists, social workers, artists, media person, along with a host of Tibet supporters and members of the forum. In Delhi, Bharat-Tibet Samanvay Sangh, led by Srimati Sandhya Singh, National General Secretary, the Women's Wing and its members participated in the official program of the 64th Tibetan National Uprising Day, organized by Samyeling Tibetan Settlement in Manchukatila. The members of the Bharat-Tibet Samanvay Sangh also joined the Tibetan brothers and sisters in Dehradun, Shimla, and Mainpat in commemorating the significant day. Bharat-Tibetan Sahyog Manch General Secretary Shri Pankaj Goyal and the members joined the 10 March program at Jantar Mandir, Delhi, organized by Regional Tibetan Youth Congress, Delhi. India-Tibet Friendship Society senior member Shri Shyam Gambhir was also present at the program, showing his support. The members of Indian Tibet support groups in Gujarat, Bihar, Jharkhand, Rajasthan, Maharashtra, Bengaluru, Mysore and Tawang in Arunachal stood in full solidarity with the Tibetan freedom cause. On Wednesday this week, Representative Tile Chuki, while speaking on behalf of the Society for Threatened Peoples during the ongoing 52nd United Nations Human Rights Council session, was repeatedly interrupted by the Chinese delegation. Speaking at the interactive dialogue with the Special Rapporteur on Cultural Rights, Representative Tile Chuki thanked the Special Rapporteur for the report on cultural rights of the migrants and brought to the attention the situation of Tibetan nomads in Tibet. Immediately, the Chinese delegation raised a point of order and interrupted the statement, calling the speaker separatist involving in anti-China separatist activities. The Chinese delegation stated that allowing her to conduct in separatist activities severely violates the process and principles of the United Nations Charter, and requested the Vice President of the Council to stop the speaker from delivering her statement. The U.S. delegation at this session called the attention of the Vice President to allow the Tibetan representative to speak and not to interrupt without listening to the content of the statement. The Vice President, after due consideration of the United Nations procedures and principles, allowed Representative Tile Chuki resume the statement. The representative requested the Special Rapporteur for clear guidelines and recommendations to the Chinese government to protect the cultural rights of the Tibetans, particularly of the Tibetan nomads who are forcibly relocated from their traditional lands with a cultural heritage.
Thank you. Similarly, the UN Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, in its concluding observations last month, have raised concerns about the widespread cultural rights violations of Tibetans and also have called on the Chinese government to abolish the coerced residential school system. The committee has also raised concerns about the increasingly tighter regulation of religious practices and systemic and massive destruction of Tibetan religious sites. Furthermore, the committee has recommended China to immediately halt all forced relocation of Tibetan nomads.
On the sidelines of the ongoing 52nd United Nations Human Rights Council session, a side event was jointly organized at the United Nations by Society for Threatened Peoples, Tibet Bureau Geneva and the Uyghur World Congress on Monday this week to highlight the human rights violations faced by the Tibetans and Uyghurs. Representative Tile Chuki and Kai Müller urged the United Nations bodies and member states to hold China accountable and especially to ensure that the concluding observations of the United Nations Committee on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights are implemented by the Chinese government. A joint press conference was held to announce the launch of the Italian Parliamentary Intergroup for Tibet and to announce the Europe stand with the Tibet Protest March in Rome to commemorate the 64th anniversary of the Tibetan National Uprising Day. In the presence of chief guests for the occasion, Deputy Speaker of the Tibetan Parliament in Exile, Thomas Ringteka, representative of His Holiness the Dalai Lama, Tile Chuki at Tibet Bureau Geneva, member of Tibetan Parliament in Exile from Europe, Thupten Gyatso. The intergroup was launched by coordinator of the intergroup Senator D. Primo Andrea and members of the intergroup Senator Tarzi D. Santa Agata Gulio, member of the Chamber of Deputies Malawasi Elenia, Senator Domenica Spinelli, and former coordinator of the intergroup, Luciano Nobili. Deputy Speaker Thomas Ringteka of the Tibetan Parliament in Exile and Representative Tile Chuki from Tibet Bureau Geneva launched Italian version of Professor Michael van Waalbracht's book, Tibet Brief 2020, titled Tibet Occupato, on 11th March in Rome, Italy. The book launch was followed by interactive dialogue between Piero Verni, author and longtime Tibet supporter, and Professor Michael van Waalbracht, author of the Tibet Brief 2020. They discussed the significance of the book, especially as guiding instrument for the international community while approaching the unresolved international conflict between Tibet and China. Representative Tile commended Italia-Tibet Association for successfully completing this important project and hoped that this book will bring in better understanding of Tibet in Italy, especially amongst parliamentarians and authorities. More than 50 people, including Tsine Bargamo, president of Tibetan community of Italy, participated in the event. The Australian All-Parliamentary Friends of Tibet issued a statement on the occasion of the 64th Tibetan National Uprising Day commemoration. The statement, signed by co-chairs of the Australian All-Party Parliamentary Group for Tibet, Susan Templeman, members of the Parliament, Senator Janet Rice and Senator Dean Smith, echoed the statements of United Nations Special Rapporteurs for Minorities, Cultural Rights and Freedom of Religion, who have drawn attention to the separation of 1 million Tibetan children from families and their forced assimilation at residential schools. The 64th Tibetan Women's Uprising Day was commemorated in Taiwan with a panel discussion titled Sensitive March, 6 Decades of Tibetan Resistance Movement, organized by Doma Tsering, a postdoctoral fellow at the Department of Humanities and Social Science, National Yang Min Chao Tang University and New Bloom magazine on 12 March. The panel was presented by 3 speakers: Jigme Yishi Lama, an assistant professor at the University of Calcutta, Lagirin Namge Doga, a member of Parliament Central Tibetan Administration, and Peng Xuan Li, an activist from Taiwan who spoke about the 1959 uprising and role of women in the Tibetan resistance movement. That is all for this week's edition of Tibet This Week. Thank you for watching Tibet TV.